So to further clarify, we have the consciousness, which gives us the ability to perceive, to be here now. But unfortunately, our consciousness has become trapped and conditioned by the ego mind. The ego is the adversity to our spiritual development. Within our consciousness is tremendous natural powers and virtues that are trapped within the ego and remain inaccessible to us. It's good to remember that the ego is a multiplicity of different selves and is not one unitarily self. The more we liberate ourselves from these different egos, the more of our consciousness is freed and more able to grow spiritually. The beginning of this great battle to liberate the consciousness is in knowing how to use the consciousness in daily life. As stated, the consciousness is the ability to be here now, to observe, to perceive. So we need to begin by being here now, to live according to the philosophy of momentariness, to live in each moment. The ego mind is a slave of the past. The ego mind is conditioned by our experiences of the past. The ego mind cannot be here now. It cannot live in this moment. The ego mind is the adversity which prevents us from being here now. Even when we try and have that consciousness activity of being present, there's still this constant stream of psychological processing that is keeping us distracted and taking us out of the moment. This constant stream of psychological processing is coming from the different egos that we have within. It's important to understand that the consciousness of what Gnosis is called the essence is not the ego. The ego is just an artificial creation that traps the consciousness, but nonetheless is not the true reality of what we are. It is this modification that prevents the consciousness spiritual ascent to higher levels of existence. For this reason, if we want spiritual development and the growth of ourselves spiritually, we must begin by being here now and breaking the identification with the ego mind. Normally we identify with the ego. If an ego of anger processes within us, we identify with it. And we feel that these emotions of anger and these thoughts and actions are coming from our true self. But in reality, they're coming from an ego. But the vast majority of our thoughts, emotions, and actions are rooted in different egos and not in the consciousness. Identification means that we feel our sense of identity within something that we are not. When we identify with something we are not, then we have forgotten our true self, which is rooted in the consciousness. When we identify with the different processes of the ego, we've forgotten our true self. So to begin to reach out and taste the reality of what we really are is called self-remembering. And this is when the consciousness breaks the bonds of the ego and connects to its divine root. To enter into self-remembering, we need to begin by being here now and breaking the identification with the ego mind. In order to break that identification, first we need to know where it is that the ego functions. It's also important to understand that this physical body that we have is not the consciousness either. This physical body is a vehicle. It can either be a vehicle under the control of the consciousness or under control of the different egos. The physical body is constituted with different centers, which can either be used by the consciousness or the different eyes. There are 7 centers within us. There are 5 inferior centers and 2 superior centers. The 2 superior centers are related with the spirit and can be put into activity through self-remembrance. The 5 inferior centers are the intellectual center, the emotional center, the motor center, the instinctive center, and the sexual center. These 5 centers are synthesized as free and can be called the free brains, being the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and the motor instinctive sexual brain. The term brain doesn't necessarily refer to a physical brain of matter in the head, but refers to a specialized area of organized activity within the body that can be used by the psyche. The three brains are just vessels, just machines that can either be used by the consciousness of the different eyes. The ego can only process through the three brains, but it cannot process through the two superior centers. Any given psychological eye can arise within the human machine and take over it. Any given ego can hijack the three brains and project its own thoughts, arouse its own emotions and passions, and aim to perform its own desired actions. The problem is that we as the consciousness identify with these processes that arise in the three brains. And we, like machines, just go along with whatever it is that the ego wants. But when we identify in this way, we fall into fascination. This state of fascination is called the sleep of the consciousness, because the consciousness, once identified, becomes hypnotized and distracted, and not able to live fully in this moment. But to change this, we need a new kind of special effort, a type of effort from moment to moment, to break the chains that bind us. This special type of effort involves knowing how to use the consciousness to liberate us from suffering. We begin by being attentive, by being here now. But when we try and be here now, what happens is that we may remain attentive for a while and be observing the things around us and what's happening in this moment. But eventually, our attention slides off and we become distracted by something processing in our three brains. In other words, we become identified by some form of activity that's coming from the ego, and we get taken out of this moment. Even when we try and be here now and we observe our environment, we see the things around us, all the smells and all the sounds, but we never really see much in regards to ourselves. It's good to remember that within us is the three brains, and there's this constant stream of processing happening that we don't really actively perceive. We might in some sense know it's there, but we don't really actively observe it. For example, we may know that we are seated in a living room. This, however, does not signify that we are observing the chair. The same applies for our psyche. We may know that we are in a negative state. This does not mean that we are observing that negative state within ourselves. Knowing is based on a passive attention, whereas observation is active. It's based on directed attention. This process of being here now and being vigilant and observant of oneself and dynamically observing one's own psychological processes is called self-observation. It's only through self-observation that we can see and perceive for ourselves that we are a psychological multiplicity constituted by many and multiple different egos, by different eyes. It's through observing ourselves, through observing the different processes of the ego as they occur in this moment, that we can create an inner sense of separation between the observer, which is the consciousness, and the observed, the ego. This inner sense of separation is what breaks identification and lays the foundation for radical change. So let's be here now. Let's observe ourselves. Let's observe ourselves as we actually are. So let's be here now. Let's feel this body that we as a consciousness are within, and perceive everything outside and inside as it is.